Hi, and welcome to Contracts Over Coffee, a podcast where we talk about all things contracting while sipping a delicious coffee beverage. I'm your host, Dan Baker. I'm Senior Director of Partner Marketing here at Icertis. And today with me is a terrific guest, Ryan Flynn from our partner, Deloitte Consulting. Ryan specializes in working with procurement professionals in leading complex strategic sourcing engagements. Welcome to the program, Ryan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Now, we like to start out these podcasts by asking all of our guests the same starting question. What is your story?
So I took a somewhat unconventional route to contract management, I would say. Um, Out of business school, I started in consulting in the Detroit area. I went to business school at University of Michigan, and because I was working in that area, naturally, a lot of the client work that we were doing was related to the auto industry, and the auto industry is one of the, I would say, vanguards in terms of procurement because a very high percentage of what they make is comprised of externally purchased goods from all over the world, as we're learning during the pandemic. Really, just because of that, I started getting into supply chain and procurement as part of that work that I was doing, and really fell in love with it. And through that, became a lot more familiar with the importance of contract management as part of supply chain and sourcing and procurement. And really, that was around 2001, 2002, and I never looked back. And soon thereafter, I joined Deloitte, and I'm now a partner in the supply chain practice at Deloitte, specializing in sourcing and procurement, and in particular, specializing in contract lifecycle management with solutions like Icertis.
Great. Yeah, during this period of time, we're certainly seeing how important supply chain management can be. What do you think is the biggest challenge with contracting today?
So, as you said, we're really seeing the challenges here. I think the biggest challenge, and one that the pandemic has kind of laid bare, is visibility into contract data and inability to do quick and easy analytics on your contracts. Companies all over the world, for the past couple of months, have been really struggling to get that visibility into the contracts that they have, both with their customers and with their suppliers. So what kind of obligations do they have to their customers, and what do they need to be thinking about in terms of how they fulfill those obligations, or get out of fulfilling those obligations in this pandemic. Same thing on the supply side. What sort of obligations do their suppliers have with them, and how they need to think about that, and how do they get access to that information quickly and easily so that they can make the right decisions moving forward. So we at the end of last year, we released our annual global CPO survey, and as part of that, one of the things that we found was that CPOs were saying that the area that they expected to have the most impact in terms of technology over the next couple of years by a wide margin was analytics. And as part of that survey, we also looked at specifically a group of procurement executives who we considered complexity masters based on the job that they were doing in terms of delivering savings, in terms of being able to build strong relationships internally and externally, et cetera. And what we found as part of that was that these complexity masters were up to 20 times, or 20% rather, more likely to have confidence in their analytics ability. So I really think that is going to be something that we'll see a lot more of moving forward. It's really the focus point of companies today, is really to get that level of analytics to be able to understand what sort of obligations that they have, and really understand the impacts of those obligations on their customers and on their suppliers.
So you're talking about analytics. Do you think that's really where contracting is headed next then? Where do you think contracting is going?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a huge part of it, and we're seeing more and more companies really want to have access to advanced analytics and some of the technology that's coming into play today. Things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, use of that kind of information to be able to extract and make sense of unstructured data, like the data that's often found in contracts. So I really see that as an area where contract management is going. And then if you look maybe a little bit further out and think about things like blockchain and the capability to provide visibility all throughout the supply chain by using a technology like that, and having things like smart contracts where you might be able to enforce penalties for late delivery based on terms that you have in your contract, and use of blockchain technology to be able to capture when goods are delivered. That's really the future, I think, and that's where more and more companies are going to start looking for in terms of their contract management.
Yeah, I know even when the pandemic kind of broke here, even in marketing, one of the first things, excuse me, I did was turn to our contracts to look at all of our trade shows and events and, use obviously the Icertis contract management solution to quickly search for force majeure clauses,
Hmm.
to understand, what our obligations were in those areas. And that's just, in marketing. I can only imagine if you're a large, enterprise with hundreds and thousands of suppliers that you quickly have to do that same exercise with. It would be almost impossible if you didn't start having some of the AI capabilities and analytics capabilities that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's really it's the contracts and it's the visibility down into the supply chain as well, because I know a lot of companies that we're talking to are really concerned about um, disruptions deeper into their supply chains. They typically have a pretty good idea of what's going on with a lot of their key, more strategic suppliers, but it's further down the supply chain that they just don't have that visibility. It may not even be a contracting issue per se, but that same idea of visibility into the suppliers and understanding what's going on and where there might be some risk of bankruptcy, for example,
Hmm.
with some of those suppliers, which then would go back to contracts. What do you have in place with respects to that? And it gets into also, I think, strategy that you're starting to see companies thinking about. So if one of my suppliers does go bankrupt and they provide something that I really need, how do I get another alternative source of supply online pretty quickly? And how do I think differently about my supply chain, given that these things may be happening in the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's stabilizing your suppliers and situation, and there's also preparing for and anticipating what could be coming next. So, I think that's all a great point. What do you think people would be surprised to know about contracting today?
So, I really think when people think of contracting, they tend to think of the legal department, and I think one thing that people would be surprised about is that contracting, at its core, certainly has a huge component that is governed by the legal department, but really contracts go way beyond the legal department, and if you think about contracting from an end-to-end perspective, it really is a very cross-functional discipline. And to be able to do it effectively, you need to have all of those different parts of the organization, in addition to legal, working together. I mean, contracts really are kind of the heart of the business. They govern the relationships that a company has with both its customers and with the suppliers of a company. So beyond just thinking about the legal aspects of the languages in the contract, but by the way is very important, especially now as we're seeing, because it can help
Mhm.
protect you from risk. But from a commercial standpoint, it really goes beyond that. And more and more companies, I think, are starting to realize that they need to optimize their contract management, not only in legal or with respect to legal, but really from an end-to-end perspective, and looking at their sales operations, their procurement, their finance, HR, all these different parts of the organization that get involved in contracts and have a stake in it. not to mention customers and suppliers that also you work with on those contracts. So I think that's one thing that more people are starting to realize, that contracts is not just a legal discipline. It's really a cross-functional discipline for it to be as effective as it can be in an organization.
Yeah, you're singing our song there, Ryan, because I know at Icertis, we're, very focused on providing contract management enterprise-wide. So buy-side contracts where they're, procuring new suppliers, or sell-side contracts, or even just corporate contracts with your own employees. Standardizing those processes and kind of templatizing the processes across the board enterprise-wide can have huge efficiencies if done and thought about in that kind of a strategic way. And I know that's why Gartner has recently, in their latest Magic Quadrant that came out, talked about how CLM is really moving from contract lifecycle management, is moving from something that was a nice to have to something that now, and certainly with this pandemic, has become a must have technology. So, there's a lot of different sources out there for different contracting best practices and information. What is one contracting tip that you wish every person knew?
So, along the lines of what we were just discussing, one of the blogs that I tend to read pretty religiously is called Spend Matters. It's very much focused on end-to-end procurement, or all things procurement, I should say. And I read it because it really gives me that broader view of what's going on in the world of procurement, and different areas that will have ultimately impacts on contract management. So, not just the contract management view of the world, but the broader view of, um, direct materials procurement, indirect procurement, enabling technology in different areas that has impacts on contract management. Obviously, there's a lot of talk now about risk management, particularly with respect to suppliers and other third parties. That's an area that has pretty obvious tie-ins, with contract management. So I think that's a great place to go to learn a lot more about procurement from an end-to-end perspective, that will help someone who's involved in contract management kind of understand the broader landscape.
Yeah, we work quite a bit with Pierre Mitchell over there, the managing director at Spend Management. He's done a great job. And Pierre, if you're listening there, Ryan just gave you a great free shout out there. So now switching gears a little bit off of contracting to talk a little bit more about you personally. What do you think people would be surprised to know about you, Ryan?
Oh, where to start? So I think one area that comes to mind is that I don't do it as well as I used to, but I speak Russian, and I spent quite a bit of time in my earlier years in the former Soviet Union, and actually the Soviet Union back in the day. So I started in high school taking Russian, in large part because my mother told me not to, and I was that kind of kid. And when I was in high school, I had the opportunity in the late '80s to go over to the Soviet Union a couple times, which was really fascinating, something that I'll never forget. And then when I graduated from college, by that time, the Soviet Union had fallen. And so I decided to go back over right after college and teach English for a year in a part of the former Soviet Union, or part of Russia at that point, which had been closed to foreigners before the fall of the Soviet Union. So that was a really fascinating experience. And then after that, when I came back to the US, I started working in the international development space, providing training to folks from the former Soviet Union. And then I even continued it on into business school, where I spent some time doing some project work for Caterpillar as part of a program that we had at my business school. And so spent some time traveling around and looking at the OEM parts market over in Russia, and how that would impact them. So unfortunately, I've not been able to keep it up of late. I wish I was able to. When I was in Chicago, I did have a cab driver I would take to the airport every week, and he was called Vlad Cab, and so he and I would speak Russian quite often. Vlad, if you're listening, привет. Um, but since then, I have not had as much opportunity to take it, which is unfortunate, or speak it rather. which is unfortunate.
Sounds like Deloitte needs some new Russian customers.
Yes.
My sister-in-law is actually from Russia, and the only Russian I know is I think it's Naz Darovia. Just
Yes.
cheers. Is that it?
Yes.
I'm sure I'm butchering it, but that's about the
Probably,
extent of
probably
my
vodka.
Russian. That's right. But vodka. There we go. That's about all I know from Russian. So, and then we like to end on one more question about you personally. What inspires you, Ryan? What kind of gets you up in the morning? What motivates you?
So, professionally, obviously, it's the work that I do, particularly around contract management and helping companies to improve how they execute their contract management and really build capabilities around it. But, uh, you know, outside of that, I think one thing that really inspires me is public radio. And I sit on the operations committee, which is a subcommittee of the board for public broadcasting here in Atlanta. And have been working with them over the past couple of years. We've done a couple of pro bono projects for them through Deloitte to help them improve their operations. And I really love the local angle of public radio. And I think now more than ever, there's a need for good information out there about what's going on in the world and what's going on locally. And I think that's a amazing source of that information, and it's amazing asset that we have locally around our community to learn more about what's going on.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ryan. You've been an amazing source of information today. So I think that pretty much wraps us up for today's discussion. Das Vidanya,
That's
Ryan.
it, Linda.
And I will, for our listeners, say that if you're interested in learning more about Deloitte or learning more about the Chief Procurement Officer survey that Ryan mentioned, you can visit their website to search for that. And if you'd like to learn more about some of the AI techniques or that Ryan talked about, Icertis also offers an ebook called Our Approach to AI that you can get on the Icertis website as well. So thank you again for joining us today, Ryan. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It was great. Have a great day.
You too.